Water.
No.
Attention, everybody. The views and opinions expressed on the show are not necessarily those of Acts Ministry, Acts Media Group, and/or their affiliate and subordinate ministries and/or nonprofits. Wrong song, Dr. Paul.
Okay.
It's that time again.
There you go.
It's a happy hour with your host, Dr. Paul Mullins, and his lovely wife, Nancy. Will they have a guest today? No, that's all right. They're a lot of fun. Take it away, Dr. Paul and Nancy.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the happy hour. The best, happiest broadcast you're going to find anywhere this side of heaven. And hello, my first secretary, Shirley Simpson. Bless your heart. Hang in there. Nancy and I, one of these days, we will get to Jeff City and we will see you in, not Jeff City, St. Joe, and we'll see you in person. Had Jeff City on my brain. Talk about that later. Also, hello, Judy Nickel in Bryan, Texas. Talked to you on the phone last evening when you called. Glad to hear from you. And you stay blessed, dear lady. And then Galen Garrett, faithful viewer in the Dallas Metroplex area. Galen, we're always glad to know that you're on the other side of these cameras.
I know, and there's Lyle and Darlene Way and Dr. Terry and Janet Gage.
Oh, yes. And Mark Elvers and Deborah.
Yes, that's right.
All those up there in the Lubbock, Texas area on
That's
what
right.
they call the Capstone, the Cap Rock. And except for Lyle and Darlene, they live off the Cap Rock down there in Ransom Canyon, Texas.
Mm-hmm.
And let's see, Jerry Chambers, Chesterfield, Missouri. Jerry, hello. Hope you get back to Springfield one of these days and stop in and see me again. Anyway, also Janie Wood up in Northeast Missouri. People all over the place and all over the world. And we're coming to you from Springfield, Missouri, which, as you know, I'm fond of calling Springburg, USA. We're in the southwest quadrant of the state of Missouri, which puts us right in the middle of the world. And so all of you in France and Germany and South America and Middle East, every place, welcome. We're glad you're with us. In your particular time zone, some of you are staying up at night just to watch us. We're honored. Well, Nancy, we are our guests today.
Yep.
And we're going to be that way for a while because we have a lot of things to talk about. And we will schedule some guests. We have some people waiting in line, actually, to be guests on this show. We'll get to them. But in the meantime, there are some issues that need to be addressed from a Christian worldview. And so we state it right up front that our views come from a Christian worldview. That is, how would Christians generally, now not any particular denomination, not coming from any one so-called camp, as they say in some circles, but coming to you from a point of view that's based on classical Christian theology, classical Christian morals, classical Christian ethics, which, by the way, the difference between morals and ethics, we've confused the differences these days. Mm-hmm. Ethics is a set of standards by which you evaluate morals and behavior. Morals is behavior. So ethics evaluates, I don't want to use the word judges, evaluates, mm-hmm. and morals is the behavior. Anyway, more on that another time. Right now, today, Nancy, we are obeying civil authority and the rules concerning all the proper behavior according to elected and non-elected officials concerning the coronavirus. Right up front, what are your thoughts? And then we'll get into some really good stuff here.
My thoughts are, in my opinion, for me, from now until there's no more coronavirus happening like it is now, I'm going to wear a mask whenever I'm out, and I'm also, depending on where I am, I'm going to use gloves, disposable gloves.
All right, that's coming from a nurse. Now, I recognize that in our audience we have the naysayers, those who think there is no virus, and we have those who say there is something, but it may not be anything more than just the equivalent of the flu. And we have some who say the whole thing is contrived, it's all political, it's all for sociological change and political change and economic change. There are all kinds of opinions out there. I am not here to dispute opinions nor to set up a base for argument. That's not what we're about. We're here to provide you with information. What I've just told you is valid information. As most of you know, there are a variety of opinions concerning the coronavirus, which is known specifically as COVID-19. Now, in doing some research, because I receive monthly this little newsletter, it's Imprimis or Imprimis, 5,400,000 readers monthly. And it's a publication of Hillsdale College. Now, let me tell you about Hillsdale College. Nancy, I haven't even told you this. Hillsdale College is a private conservative college in Hillsdale, Michigan. Hillsdale, Michigan has a population around 8,500. So this reminds me of the college where I graduated, which is now Central Methodist University. When I went there, it was just old Central College in Fayette, Missouri. It's F-A-Y-E-T-T-E, Fayette, Missouri, right up in the center of the state. Little town of probably 6,000 people. Biggest thing there is the college, which is now university. So Hillsdale College is a small conservative college in a small town in Hillsdale, Michigan, which Hillsdale is located on the south central, almost central part of Michigan. So that gives you the location. It was founded, and that's highly accredited, by the way. It was founded in 1844. Now that's before the Civil War. And it was founded by abolitionists. Like 20 years before the Civil War, nearly 20 years before, some abolitionists founded Hillsdale College.
How come?
Because this is going to blow your mind. They were Free Will Baptists who believed that not only should you have free will concerning salvation, but you should have free will concerning your lifestyle, and you should be free.
So you're just free to do anything you want?
No. Free Will Baptists are very strict people in their theology and in morals and in ethics. Very strict to this day. And if you want to hear some romping, stomping, hellfire and brimstone preaching, you go to a Free Will Baptist church, and those folks know that. They take it as a compliment. We have dear friends who are Free Will Baptists, and evangelists, and musicians, and they don't want to be known any other way. So, but isn't it interesting? Free Will Baptists in 1844 were abolitionists. They were among the first. And
okay, what does an abolitionist mean?
That means they wanted to abolish slavery.
Oh.
How about that?
Yeah.
Now, in these days in which we live, isn't it ironic that a Free Will Baptist church might be subject to vandalism by the so-called progressivists and those who want to cancel culture because they are a church and they might want to destroy it? And they were the people in 1844 who were opposed to slavery. They were standing out in the crowd, in a sense, in those days.
Mm-hmm.
Do you get the irony here?
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, their slogan for the college is, strength rejoices in the challenge. So back when they were founded, there was a real challenge presented when you were opposed to slavery, and they They put that college together for the purpose of abolishing slavery. And in all the opposition they had, they said we have strength because of our opposition. Those who oppose us make us stronger. That's a good lesson for Christians. It's a good lesson for anybody. When you have challenges, just get stronger. Their tuition in 2019 per year, $28,368. That's pretty much about the same as you would find in a small conservative college anywhere in the country. Now, they don't take just everybody. Their acceptance rate in 2018 of applications, they only accepted 36% of those who applied. So they are on a par with Harvard, Yale, Princeton, and Columbia, all the Ivy League schools. They're just not well known. Small, private, conservative college. Small, private, conservative college. And they have tremendous accreditation. They are also the publishers of the Great Books course, which anybody can subscribe to, and you get a big catalog. I get it like quarterly, and you can order books out of there that are textbooks on every topic imaginable. And also, they have free online courses.
Wow.
Isn't that something?
Yeah.
I mean, here is a little hidden gem. How did I hear about Hillsdale College? I'm glad you asked that question. Because a man who studied and became a maritime engineer, later, after traveling the world in that capacity, moved to Springfield, Missouri, to little old Springburg, USA, to do a master's program in Christian counseling at a local denominational seminary, and then became a part of our Bible study group in our home on a Wednesday night. And every now and then he would slip me a little bit of information he'd printed off that came from Hillsdale College. And I started wondering, what is a Hillsdale College? And then I got on their mailing list, and I get this printout every month, this newsletter, and you can find them online at hillsdalecollege.com, HILLSDALE, hillsdalecollege.com, and you're in for a good education just finding out about Hillsdale College. Mm-hmm. Now, they're not paying me for these endorsements. They don't even know I'm talking to you. They probably don't even know that I exist other than on their mailing list, but that's okay. And got to get back here to my page. Want also to let you know that obviously I've become very high tech. Here's my stupid smartphone, and here's my stupid iPad, and at home I have two stupid computers on the desk in my writing room. So that's enough about Hillsdale College background. Now let me tell you what a lady who wrote for their publication had to say about the virus. Here we go. Now, these are her opinions, not necessarily mine, although I understand and I agree with much of it. Just because I read you something doesn't mean that, well, that's what old Dr. Paul thinks about everything. That's what sweet little Miss Nancy thinks about. No, but we try to. I was thinking this morning, I'm getting news from at least a dozen different sources every day. Oh, and before I get to this, have to tell you, I want you to stay with us on these broadcasts. I want you to tell a friend because we're going to be dealing week to week with some very pertinent topics. We're going to deal with things like this virus. We're going to deal with other medical news. We're going to deal with money matters. Have you heard of FedCoin, F-E-D-C-O-I-N, FedCoin? Well, you'll hear it from me maybe next week or whenever, because one of these days you won't be carrying dollar bills in your wallet. Fact is, many of you don't even carry them now. FedCoins, new digital kind of currency, and it's from reliable sources. I don't bring you anything unless it's by the experts. That we'll have some programs, believe it or not, on politics. Yes, why not? From a Christian worldview. We'll have some programs on science. We'll have some on psychology / sociology. We'll have some on various scientific developments. And my background was as a pre-med student, and I switched to philosophy, ended up with a major in philosophy and a minor in history and chemistry, and then a 3-year master's program, a Master of Divinity, wherein I concentrated with pastoral care and counseling, another fancy way of talking about psychology. I'm not losing you now, stay with me. And then later on earned a doctorate in psychology. Now, I served on school boards, 2 different school boards. I was the president of the Northeast region of the Missouri School Boards Association. I did a little work in politics. I did a project for the federal government through the state of Missouri on a book on public employee collective bargaining, which had to do with public unions. I've been on mental health boards, etc. I headed up fundraising for the Salvation Army in a rural county a number of years ago. And I've said all that to set the stage for the fact that sometimes there's an advantage in being 85 years young because you have all this stuff, this stockpile of experience to draw on that's not based on yesterday or last year. It's based on the history of developments. So, because of that, yesterday I clicked on my computer screen to drpaulcollins.com, drpaulcollins.com, and there was the front page of a new website, drpaulcollins.com. And I'm inviting all of my viewers, our viewers, to have a part in the development of that website. I want you to watch it every day, and my email address will be on there. My office phone number will be on there, and you can contribute to that website your suggestions about another room that it needs to have or another message and so forth. Together, we will build a statement, a major statement to reach the world in addition to this broadcast and everything else that Acts Media Group is doing. So, drpaulcollins.com, and in the meantime, you can send me an email, drpaulcollins@sbcglobal.net. Now, that sets the stage for me then to have us talk about this because I read it, turned it over to Nancy, and had her read it. Mm-hmm. This article in Imprimis, it's a Latin word, publication of Hillsdale College. This article was written by Heather McDonald from the Manhattan Institute. Now that's a prestigious group. And it's entitled 4 Months of Unprecedented Government Malfeasance. By the way, Tammy Renee over there in Illinois, you're watching. I've been receiving your messages by way of internet and so forth. And your feelings about coronavirus, COVID-19, etc., at least in part. And I've been responding and hope you'll go online to hillsdalecollege.com and pick up on some more of this. Tammy Renee was Miss Chicago, and she's a Christian singer and a beautiful lady when it comes to fashion and personal appearance. And in fact, she has a product line that she offers that has to do with feminine beauty, etc. Tammy Renee, we love you. Stay in touch. Tell your mama hello. 4 months of unprecedented government malfeasance. That means dirty tricks, basically. Heather McDonald is the Thomas W. Smith Fellow, even though she's a woman. You know what those academic terms are. Thomas W. Smith Fellow at the Manhattan Institute and a contributing editor of City Journal. That's a publication. She earned a B.A., Bachelor of Arts, from Yale University. She earned a Master of Arts and M.A. in English from Cambridge University. I think that's over there in England someplace, in the old country across the pond. And she is has a J.D., Juris Doctoris. It's a law degree from Stanford Law School. She writes for several newspapers and periodicals, including the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, the Criterion, and Public Interest, and is the author of 4 books, including The War on Cops, How the New Attack on Law and Order Makes Everyone Less Safe, and The Diversity Delusion, How Race and Gender Pandering Corrupt the University and Undermine Our Culture. Now, the following, this newsletter article, is adapted from a lecture that she delivered on June the 18th, just this past June the 18th, for a Hillsdale College online symposium. And it was entitled The Coronavirus and Public Policy. Now, Nancy, I've gone through all that to establish the credentials of this lady. What was your sense when you read this, all of this report of her article?
If I didn't have my mind out there and only had my mind right here, I would disregard a lot of that, because to me, how could all of that be? How could what is said, say by her or other people, really have, surely that isn't going on. But thinking way out here, and you're looking at all that you see and hear on TV or radio or in print, then you start to wonder, and you hear there's so many differences of opinion on like CNN and Fox News and MSNBC and all of that. They all have their slant on things. And I know people that if it's said on CNN that it's true, there's no variance to it, and come to find out, no, that's not true. When this lady, she's very way out here, so there's probably some truth to what she is saying about COVID-19, about, say, the police, about government, and so forth and so forth. Now, here's your deal. This is so awesome. In my opinion, God is so big that he's so out there, and he's just, he is over everything. So how in the cat hair could anybody think that anything bad is going to be in this country, a Christian, so-called Christian country? Yeah, that's the way it is. Otherwise, the Bible wouldn't have been talking about and bringing up what's going to happen in the so-called last days. Well, that's a whole opinion about last days, but that's how come people like her can write what they write, because there is, I won't say it's piled high and deep true, but I have to think, since I'm way out here, that a lot of what she says may have truth in it.
So in other words, we're going to take everything with a grain of salt, no matter where it comes from, and we're going to try to use our God-given
Yes.
abilities
Yes.
to let our behavior be according,
Yes.
have it accordingly, and we are going to try very hard to always have a Christian point of view
Yes.
because that's
right.
who we are.
Yeah, that's right. And just because I'm a Christian doesn't mean that I'm going to accept every bare hair thing because of what somebody says, no matter how nice they are.
That's
I'm
right.
always evaluating.
By the way, I intend one of these days to do, may take more than one program, an in-depth look at televangelism today as compared to the way it was back in the days of the radio preachers before they got on television. And certainly I try to watch and follow and stay up with the developments in that corporate world of televangelism. And just because I hear something said by a televangelist doesn't mean I have to believe it. And same way when I hear a politician or when I hear anybody evaluating the stock market. I get a lot of stock market information in my news search every day, and it's amazing how they can contradict each other. So after a while, you just have to think for yourself and try not to get into battles with other people. Be a peacemaker, but do not give up the war.
Yeah, see, the thing of it is, people, they're coming from their own perspective, their own background, their own whatever.
That's right.
And when you talk to somebody, you have to remember that. So when you consider that, it's much easier, I might say, to give them your so-called benefit of the doubt about what they say.
Well, this lady, I'm going to be reading now from Imprimis, Heather McDonald, what she had to say. She said over the last 4 months, well, now it's almost 5 months, Americans have lived through what is arguably the most consequential period of government malfeasance in U.S. history. Public officials' overreaction to the novel coronavirus put American cities into a coma. Those same officials' passivity in the face of widespread rioting threatens to deliver the coup de grace, which is French for, the kill. Together, these back-to-back governmental failures will transform the American polity and cripple urban life for decades. Before store windows started shattering in the name of racial justice, urban existence was already on life support thanks to the coronavirus lockdowns. Small businesses, the restaurants and shops that are the lifeblood of cities, were shuttered, many for good, leaving desolate rows of for rent signs on street after street in New York City and elsewhere. Now, I interject here. We know that this has happened and is still happening. This is true. Whether or not it was due to government malfeasance, that depends on your point of view. For rent signs on street after street in New York City and elsewhere, Americans huddled in their homes for months on end. Not actually. Some did. Believing that if they went outside, death awaited them.
That's that person's mindset.
That's right. And it's the mindset of this writer. This panic was occasioned by epidemiological models predicting wildly unlikely fatalities from the coronavirus. Now, just as recent as this morning, I heard on local news how these figures as to the number of people infected, the number of people who died from the infection, etc., are questioned. Some set the number much lower, some set the number much higher, and they get off into dealing with percentages. And I'm not a mathematician. However, I know enough to be dangerous, and I know that when you start dealing with percentages, you can make a lot of things seem like what they aren't. or you can make a lot of things that are not seem like they are.
Mm-hmm.
And so this drove me to a consideration of a word that we've been hearing a lot, algorithm. Because, for instance, we're on social media with this broadcast, and there are those who say they've been cut out of social media or blocked out or whatever, and the people that run social media, all the way from the biggest stockholders down to the bottom, they say, well, we have an algorithm that makes these determinations. So I'm thinking, I took algebra in the 9th grade, but what are they talking about with an algorithm? And we've had it bannered around, this term, for months now. I finally looked it up to see what an algorithm is. Guess what? When you look it up online, you can read about it in a variety of places, and none of it makes any sense. It's a method that they use, a methodology that's used to evaluate opinion.
Oh.
And so what it comes down to is if your opinion doesn't fit the main algorithm, your opinion is thrown out.
Oh, wow.
So we need to get an education, folks, on all this stuff. Otherwise, we will be as lambs led to the slaughter. Let me give you an illustration
that's
about that.
neat.
When I was a pastor in St. Joseph, Missouri, hello again, Shirley Simpson, my first secretary in St. Joe. When I was a pastor there, the stockyards were a big deal because the packing houses were a big deal. We had Swift and Company, Armour and Company, Dugdale, Sites, big packing companies, and big stockyards. And I used to just really enjoy going down to the stockyards and being around the livestock, the cattle, the hogs, the sheep, etc. In those days, the packing houses, killing floors were way up high, top floor. Like if it was a 10-story building or 6-story building, that's where the killing floor was. So the animals walked up this long ramp to get to the top floor. And when they stepped out onto the killing floor, I don't mean to be too graphic here, but you know what happened. They ended up as hamburger or sausage or whatever by the time they got processed on the ground floor, where they were shipped out on rail cars and trucks to the grocery stores and other places. So it was interesting to watch the sheep because they used a wily old goat to lead the sheep. He had a bell on him, and wily old goat, they'd put him in the pen with these sheep, and he'd walk around and rattle his bell, and he'd start walking up this long ramp. And these innocent sheep would follow him up the ramp. And when they got up to the top floor of the packing house, which was also the slaughterhouse, of course, the old goat would step through that entranceway and go to his right, and the next sheep came along. The worker got the sheep with the thing around the foot, hoisted it up, stuck it in the neck so that it would bleed out. The next sheep, the next sheep, the next sheep. And after they'd processed that load so that their carcasses were going down to be processed, the old goat was down there in the sheep yard rattling his bell, and more sheep would follow the old goat up the ramp so that they would end up on somebody's dinner table. The old goat, he died of old age. Now, we have people today being led as lambs to the slaughter because they would rather listen to the old goat bell than get online and read something for themselves. Now, here I get to do a little bit of picking at you because I have some friends, and that's why I tell you to tell a friend, because I've got some friends who won't have a computer in the house. Guess what? Those are the same people who probably don't read. And if they do get a newspaper, it's pretty skinny anymore, and newspapers are going out. They get all their news off of television, and that means they're getting all kinds of propaganda. So they are letting the old goat lead them, whether they're watching a liberal news outlet or a conservative news outlet. They're still being led. Folks, get on your computer and research. I know you're not going to crack books like you used to. The libraries now are not as available as they used to be, but a computer's in your home, and you can get on there and find out all kinds of stuff. You don't have to be a lamb led to the slaughter by an old goat. Now, I read this kind of stuff, and then I go online to check out, what is Hillsdale College anyway? Let me go back to this lady, Heather McDonald, with her bachelor's degree, her master's degree, and her JD degree, and see what she had to say, because obviously she has a viewpoint about the coronavirus, COVID-19, that she's putting a lot of blame on the government and on misinformation. You have to, as we used to say, pay your money and take your chances. She said on March 30th, the infamous Imperial College London model predicted 2.2 million deaths in the United States by September 1 without any government action. And in other words, if there was no government action, there'd be 2.2 million Americans die by September 1. So she's saying the Imperial College of London is promoting government interference. That prediction, she said, was absurd on its face given the dispersal of the U.S. population. That is, we are a big, so long, Steve McAllister, Brighter Living guy. Watch him on Axe Media Group. Anyway, the United States is a big country, and we have some places where the population is not dense. So she says, given the dispersal of the U.S. population and the fact that China's coronavirus death toll had already leveled off at a few thousand, the authors of that study soon revised it radically downwards. Too late, she says. It had already become the basis for the exercise of unprecedented government power. Now, those of you who like to have the opinion that the government is using this as an excuse to exert more power, she's speaking your language. Not necessarily mine. I'm not going to tell you my language on it. Take too long. But I'm giving you her language, and she's speaking a language that some of you understand. She said California was the first state to lock down its economy and confine its citizens to their homes. Eventually, almost every other state would follow suit under enormous media pressure to do so. Now, again, you pay your money and you take your chances. This is this woman's opinion, and she's the speaker at a major symposium that was held at a very highly accredited, little-known college, private college, founded by abolitionists. Now, I want you to remember, they have historically stood in opposition to slavery and anything that has to do with racism. I hope people are getting the significance of this. Some people put forth a blanket statement that if you're a conservative, you're a racist. I beg to differ.
That's right.
These folks here, they are conservative, and they were the leading anti-slavery voice and still are. And they were founded by a very conservative Baptist denomination, Free Will Baptists, who are very different than Southern Baptists in their taproot theology. One is Southern Baptist is Calvinistic in their taproot. Free Will Baptists are Arminian in their taproot. That's another story for another time, but they are different. And so just because they are conservative politically and conservative in their Christianity doesn't mean that they have to be racist. No, quite the contrary, because they were among the first abolitionists. Now, never before, this lady said, had public officials required millions of lawful businesses to shut their doors, throwing tens of millions of people out of work. She got that right. This is new. We haven't experienced this, not ever. I go back to World War II. I was telling Nancy last evening, if we think this is something, those that were not alive in World War II have no idea what that was like. You talk about a challenge. We stood in line, and see, my mom made biscuits from scratch 3 times a day, 7 days a week, with the exception of Saturday night. And that's when we would have a treat. We'd have light bread and bologna. Light bread was what you would call now white bread, a loaf of bread. We would stand in line from early in the morning waiting for the bread truck to show up at a small neighborhood grocery store no larger than this studio with our 15 cents, either 15 pennies or a dime and a nickel or 3 nickels plus 1 mil, which was a tax, 1/10 of 1 cent, to pay old age pension for older people. That tax is gone now. Anyway, we would wait in line to get 1 loaf of light bread. You couldn't just pull up to a service station and fill up on gasoline. It was rationed. In those days, margarine had not been invented. You were dependent upon lard, which came from hogs. Lard was rationed. Lard was used in baking and in frying and all kinds of things in the kitchen, and it was used for other things too, even medicinally. Lard was rationed. Flour that came in 10-pound bags was rationed. Tires were rationed. I remember we would see someone with a new set of tires, and we would think, how in the world did he get a new set of tires? And someone would say, that's just those old synthetics. Well, you see, in those days, the Japanese had captured the rubber tree plantations in the Pacific, and so rubber tires were scarce, and they went, if they had any, went to the military. Well, those old synthetics were made of a substance that the war made necessary for the American ingenuity to invent. And guess what? We're all running around in our cars now on those old synthetics. And they last longer than the old rubber tires. I remember when I had to buy a set of tires every year on my first car. When I was 16 years old, I bought it. Every year I had to buy a set of tires. Not so anymore. Tires will almost wear out a car. Everything was rationed. And not only that, but we went to the train station to see brothers and cousins and uncles and neighbors go off to war. Many of them never to come back. Loss of life in World War II was humongous. So those people who fuss about inconvenience with the COVID-19, no matter how real it is or how phony it is or how contrived or how dangerous, put all that to one side. Let me tell you, folks, some of us are old enough to remember when times were really tough.
Paul, what was it? There was 2 other times that they had.
Well, 1918.
There you go.
Spanish flu.
Yeah.
I've said maybe on this broadcast, my dad, who was born in 1899, married my mom when he was 16, and she wasn't quite 16. That's the way it was in those days. In 1918, because there was no radio, no newspaper, they lived out in the country, he probably didn't even know there was a Spanish flu. Well, it was big, it was serious. As a kid, I worked in a grocery store for a man who was old enough that he was in World War I, and he was stationed in Texas, and soldiers were dying all around him with the flu, and they were sleeping in one blanket on the ground, and he smoked cigars, in spite of the fact that his wife didn't like it, and in spite of the fact that he had a big old blue mark on his lip where he carried a cigar all the time. But he told me unequivocally that he felt like smoking cigars was all that saved him from the Spanish flu. Well, that was his opinion and his experience. But the Spanish flu was quite serious. So, folks, we've been through things before.
Yeah, such as there was 2 other times recently, you might say.
Oh yeah, well we had SARS, we had the swine flu, we had the bird flu, and every year we have the flu. And every year people die from the flu, and every year, every week almost, people die in nursing homes. What do we expect people in nursing homes to do? If they are there because of age and decline physically and physical problems, some of them with mental issues too, well, what do we expect? Do we expect them to live there forever?
Yeah.
I think not. At age 85, I've outlived most of the people from my graduating class from high school. Some are still around with me. But when you go to a nursing home, you don't go there thinking that you're going to suddenly be like Superman, go into a phone booth as Clark Kent and come out as Superman. You're not going to go into a nursing home and come out as super person. So people die in nursing homes. I am of an age, and with the health issues that I have overcome, they still lurk out there in the shadows. I am very vulnerable, not only to COVID-19, but I'm vulnerable to standard old flu, whatever variety it is every year, and I'm vulnerable to pneumonia. I'm vulnerable to any disease. I'm vulnerable to the common cold. So, folks, this nation has been through some tough times before. And no matter what you think has brought on these times, frankly, from one who's been there, I can tell you, it does not compare to the way it was in World War II. I walked my paper route as a kid, and I would see, and I walked it every day with 154 newspapers to deliver. Walked it every day but Sunday. And in the windows, you'd see a homemade, somebody made them plaques that glittered with crimped edges under glass. And the silver star meant they had a son or daughter in the military. A gold star meant they had a son or daughter who died in the military. I saw a neighborhood full of of silver stars and all too many gold stars. I remember a man, he had a pug nose. And so, like this, Matt, I'm talking to Matthew Dillon Pearson, my favorite radio engineer and TV engineer over there. He had a pug nose. I won't give you his last name, but I never knew his first name because he grew up as Pug. That's all anybody ever called him was Pug. And I remember Pug had a coupe. Now, your grammar teacher would say coupe, but it was a coupe, an old car, an old coupe. Well, it wasn't old in those days. It'd be old now, it'd be a collector's item. Saw him and his wife driving slowly past our house. They had been visiting his aunt next door. They were driving past us, and I saw Pug go by with his wife. He's in the driver's seat, she's in the passenger seat, and in the back window is their little boy. That's the last time I saw Pug, because from there he went to be inducted as a draftee into the Army, and he just got ashore in Europe. And just before he was able to dive into a foxhole manufactured by an artillery shell, he was shot. He never came home. He was buried over there. Folks, those were the challenges in those days, faced by a population of 125 million people, not 311 or 12 million like we have now. Overnight, we went from the first draftees marching and training with wooden rifles to having the best equipment on the earth. Overnight, they stopped making Chevrolets and Fords and Chryslers and DeSotos and LaSalles and all the other cars they made, and they made Jeeps and military trucks and tanks. Overnight, Cadillac engines were not put in cars anymore. 2 of them were put in tanks to run tanks for war. Overnight. I remember we went for a period of years where you couldn't buy a new car because American manufacturers weren't making them. You know, those were different days. They said, nobody said this would be the new normal, that it would always be like that. I remember everybody smoked cigarettes because if you had 10 or 15 cents, your entertainment was to go to a movie, and all the movie stars smoked, men and women. It was the big thing. It's not that way now, is it? If you smoke cigarettes, you're kind of looked down upon. But I knew all the brands in those days. Pall Mall, which was spelled Pall Mall, Chesterfield, Wings, Camels, Lucky Strike. And people used to have advertising. They'd walk a mile for a Camel. And Lucky Strike, they'd have LSMFT. Lucky Strike means fine tobacco. And you had Cool. And the Pall Mall filtered the smoke on the way to your throat. All those days are gone. Now, however, Lucky Strike cigarettes were in a green package with a target on them. Later, they came out in a white package with a target because everything that required green dye went for military use. And so Lucky Strike changed their slogan from LSMFT to Lucky Strike Green has gone to war. Isn't that something? You talk about upsetting society.
But what about those? What was it? There was in the 50s, and then was it in the 80s where they had a huge virus that came on?
I read that someplace, maybe in here. Well, it was while the U.S. death toll from the coronavirus has been demographically circumscribed and lower than the previous flu epidemics of most recently 1968, before that 1956, and before that 1918. When adjusted for population, the economic toll has cut across every sector of the country, every population group. Whole industries have seen their capital wiped out overnight. Now, World War II gave rise to industry. But there was a lot of personal hardship, shortages, and lots of personal sorrow, death. My 2 oldest brothers enlisted together, went together. The Seabees, they were in North Africa together for 22 months. My mom wrote each of them. The oldest one was Bob. The oldest one was Wilbur. The younger one was Bob. My mom wrote each one of them a letter every day, 7 days a week, not knowing whether they got them or not, but she wrote them. I saw that. I heard the agony and the fear that people had when we had air raid wardens, even in mid-Missouri, up in the middle part of the United States. And when we were told to put quilts before the day of blankets, quilts over our windows to keep the light from going outside. And there was a time when an American bomber pilot and crew flew over Moberly and broadcast through the old oval-top radio. We had this blackout practice, and he said if I was a German pilot, I wouldn't be able to find Moberly, Missouri. Those were some days of testing, but jobs were plentiful because of the war. Women went to work. That's when women started working. Other than that, they were stay-at-home moms. Gave rise to industry, etc. This one, COVID-19, is shutting industry down, shutting business down. So it's a different challenge. Different challenge than 1918, 1956, and 1968. This lady does make a statement that I think all of us could probably relate to, and I quote her heavy print here. The politicians, and that's plural, ignorance about the complexity of economic life was stunning, as was their hypocrisy. Every elected official, public health expert, and media pundit who lectured Americans about the need for an indefinite lockdown had a secure, and she puts in parentheses and quotes, essential job. Not one of them feared his employer would go bankrupt. Yeah, it depended on what chair you're sitting in, what house you're living in, what your job is. We had some businesses deemed essential that still create debate, some considered non-essential. She points out, rightly so, that large supermarket chains were considered essential, the way to keep open and continue operating, but small retailers weren't able to. So many challenges with this whole thing, many challenges. And she talks about the ruling class. Well, we know we have that. And she asks the question, what has been the response to this economic carnage or bloodletting on the part of our ruling class? She says their response has been branding strategies. And she uses as an example New York Governor Andrew Cuomo, who calls the state lockdowns New York on pause. Well, it's as if he thinks that commerce can be indefinitely suspended, then magically be resuscitated with the flick of a switch. I think we'll see a lot of beating of the chest to get the economic heartbeat going again. And because we're down to the last 3 minutes, I have to say that she makes a strong statement here. To care about the economy is to care about human life, since the economy is how life is sustained. So, folks, there'll be more on this. I hope you realize I've tried to present a balanced view here. But one of the things that of necessity has to be said as we come up on this time of developing vaccines, there will be controversy about that as well. I have here a print off a doctor warning about vaccines. We're going to have a lot of debate about those, about whether or not to allow ourselves to be vaccinated, whether or not officials will find ways to coerce us into vaccination, all that. But remember, all of this challenge, in my opinion, pales in comparison to the challenges of World War II. Now, don't forget, drpaulcollins.com. That's easy. I want you to participate with me in the development of a website, and that's going to be an exciting journey that we take together. It's going to be big, it's going to be first class, and it's going to be changing almost on a daily basis, because I sit in front of that computer. Matt, I spent, I don't know how many hours yesterday, day before, quite a few hours. Yesterday I spent 7.5 hours in front of the computer. The day before, about 7.5 hours in front of the computer. I'm working. Thankful to be working. Folks, don't use computers as an excuse just to play games. Get informed. Know some things. Learn about Fed coins. Learn about the cancel culture movement. Learn about a new deal. Look it up. Transhumans. We have fruit and vegetables that are altered. What is it? Anyway, the same way they alter fruit and vegetables, they're talking about altering human beings. Guess what? I think we are being altered in a lot of ways. Folks, our time is up. In spite of the fact we've brought all this hard news, it's still the happy hour, because you need to be glad that you're alive and able to get on a computer, watch this, and dig in and learn things and spread a good word. that Jesus Christ is alive, and until he comes again, I want you to stay blessed until next Friday.